ZYXthera had lived among 17 different species across the galaxy, but humans confused her more than any creature she'd ever encountered. As a xenobiologist for the Galactic Research Consortium, she'd studied the behavioral patterns of sentient life forms from the crystalline Vorthak who communicated through harmonic vibrations to the gaseous nebulons who existed as pure energy. Yet after 3 months of living with her human roommate Marcus Chen in his small apartment in downtown Seattle, she felt like she understood humans less than when she'd first arrived on Earth. The morning that would change everything started like any other. Marcus stumbled out of his bedroom at exactly 6:47 a.m., his dark hair sticking up in impossible directions. ZYXthera observed from her position at the kitchen counter, her 4 eyes tracking his movements with scientific precision. Her elongated blue-gray form stood nearly 7 feet tall, with delicate features that humans often described as ethereal. Her species, the Kethmori, were known throughout the galaxy for their analytical minds and emotional detachment. "Morning, ZYX," Marcus mumbled, heading straight for the coffee maker. This was ritual number 47 in her catalog of his daily behaviors. "Good morning, Marcus Chen," she replied formally. Despite his repeated requests for her to simply call him Marcus, she maintained the full name usage as per standard Kethmori protocol for addressing acquaintances. Marcus poured his coffee into a chipped blue mug that read "World's Okayest Employee." This particular vessel was one of hundreds of seemingly identical containers humans used for liquid consumption, yet Marcus showed a distinct preference for this damaged one. ZYXthera had noted this in her research files under inexplicable human attachment to deteriorated objects. "Got any big alien science plans today?" Marcus asked, settling into his usual spot at their small dining table. ZYXthera's primary eyes focused on him while her secondary eyes continued observing the broader environment. "I will be continuing my behavioral analysis of your species. Today's focus will be on human workplace interactions." Marcus nearly choked on his coffee. "You're not planning to follow me to work, are you? Because that might be a little weird for my coworkers." "Negative. I will observe humans in their natural work environment at the coffee establishment you frequent. The barista named Sarah has agreed to let me observe from behind the counter." "Sarah agreed to that?" Marcus raised his eyebrows. "How did you manage to convince her?" "I informed her that my research could potentially benefit her species' understanding of optimal social structures. She seemed intrigued by the possibility of contributing to galactic knowledge." What ZYXthera didn't mention was that Sarah had actually agreed after ZYXthera had demonstrated her ability to make perfect coffee using her enhanced sensory capabilities. The barista had been fascinated by how ZYXthera could detect the exact moment when coffee beans reached optimal extraction by analyzing the molecular changes in their aroma. Marcus shook his head, smiling. That expression, ZYXthera noted, appeared frequently on his face when interacting with her. She had classified it as bemused tolerance, but suspected there were subtle emotional undertones she was missing. After Marcus left for his job at a software company, ZYXthera prepared for her day of observation. She'd been on Earth for 3 months as part of a cultural exchange program, officially studying human social structures for the Galactic Research Consortium. Her real mission, however, was more complex. The Kethmori had been part of the galactic community for over 2,000 years. They were respected for their scientific achievements and analytical abilities, serving as mediators and researchers throughout the galaxy. But they had a problem that had puzzled their greatest minds for generations: they were slowly losing their ability to feel deep emotions. What had once been a species capable of profound love, joy, and even anger, had gradually become more analytical and detached with each passing century. Their birth rates were declining. Their art had become sterile and mathematical. Their society, while peaceful and logical, lacked the passion and drive that had once made them explorers and innovators. The Kethmori Council of Minds had identified this as an existential threat to their species' long-term survival. That's where humans came in. Humans were the newest species to join the galactic community, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 57 years ago. But, in that short time, they had already gained a reputation that bordered on legendary. Human explorers had ventured into dangerous sectors that other species avoided. Human diplomats had resolved conflicts that had lasted for centuries. Human artists had created works that moved even the most logical species to something resembling tears. Most importantly, humans seemed to maintain their emotional intensity even as they advanced technologically and socially. They had achieved remarkable scientific progress while still retaining their capacity for love, sacrifice, and irrational hope. The Galactic Research Consortium had received dozens of reports from various species about human behavior that defied conventional understanding of how advanced civilizations typically developed. ZYX-Thera's mission was to understand how humans maintain this emotional depth. If the Kethmori could learn from human society, perhaps they could find a way to reawaken their own capacity for feeling before it disappeared entirely. The coffee shop, been there done that, was located 3 blocks from Marcus's apartment. ZYX-Thera had chosen it as an observation point because it represented a microcosm of human social interaction. People from various backgrounds and professions gathered there daily, creating a natural laboratory for studying human behavior. Sarah, the 24-year-old barista, greeted ZYX-Thera with the warm smile that humans seem to distribute freely regardless of their actual emotional state. "Ready for another day of people watching?" Sarah asked, tying her curly red hair back with a band. "I am prepared to continue my observational research," ZYX-Thera confirmed, positioning herself behind the counter where she could observe customer interactions without interfering. The morning rush began promptly at 7:30 a.m. ZYX-Thera watched as humans flooded into the small space, each carrying their own complex web of emotions and motivations. She had learned to read human micro-expressions with remarkable accuracy, and what she saw fascinated her. A businessman in an expensive suit ordered his usual double espresso, but ZYX-Thera detected stress markers in his facial muscles and vocal patterns. When Sarah asked about his weekend, his response about visiting his daughter carried genuine warmth despite his obvious anxiety about work. Here was a being simultaneously experiencing multiple complex emotions, somehow functioning effectively despite what the Kethmori would consider overwhelming psychological noise. A college student named Jamie, whom ZYX-Thera had observed before, approached the counter looking exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes and slightly trembling hands indicated severe sleep deprivation. "The usual?" Sarah asked with a concerned expression. "Make it a triple shot today," Jamie replied. "I've got 2 finals and a job interview this week." Sarah prepared the drink but also added an extra shot and refused payment when Jamie tried to pay. "Consider it an investment in your future success," Sarah said with a wink. ZYX-Thera observed this exchange with growing confusion. Sarah had just given away product without receiving compensation, based purely on emotional connection to another human's struggle. From a logical perspective, this behavior made no sense. From a business perspective, it was counterproductive. Yet both participants seemed to benefit from the interaction in ways that transcended the economic transaction. Throughout the morning, ZYX-Thera cataloged dozens of similar interactions. Humans consistently engaged in behaviors that defied purely logical analysis. They shared personal stories with strangers, offered comfort to people they barely knew, and made decisions based on intuition rather than calculated probability. Around 11 a.m., an elderly man named Robert entered the shop. ZYX-Thera had observed him before and knew he ordered a simple black coffee and sat alone at the corner table for exactly 1 hour each day. Today, however, something was different. His usual composed demeanor showed cracks, and ZYX-Thera detected elevated stress hormones in his scent. Sarah noticed too. "Everything all right today, Mr. Peterson?" Robert attempted a smile. "Oh, just one of those days, dear." "The usual, please." As Sarah prepared his coffee, ZYX-Thera watched other customers in the shop. Several had noticed Robert's distressed state, and she observed subtle changes in their behavior. Conversations became quieter. A young mother with a crying baby moved to a table farther away to avoid disturbing him. A teenager offered his seat when Robert approached the area near the windows. These humans were adjusting their behavior based on one individual's emotional state, despite having no direct relationship with him. The Kethmori had terms for this phenomenon, but they were clinical and detached. What she was observing felt like something more profound. Then, something happened that would fundamentally alter ZYX-Thera's understanding of human nature. A woman in her 30s, carrying a briefcase and talking rapidly on a communication device, rushed into the coffee shop. She was clearly agitated, gesticulating wildly as she spoke to whoever was on the other end of the call. Her order was sharp and impatient: large coffee, black, to go, and make it fast. Sarah began preparing the drink while the woman continued her heated conversation. It was clearly business-related, with references to deadlines and client demands. Her stress levels were so elevated that ZYX could detect them from across the room. As Sarah handed over the coffee, the woman grabbed it without acknowledgement and turned to leave. But then, she stopped. Her eyes had focused on Robert, sitting alone at his corner table, staring out the window with an expression of profound sadness. The woman ended her phone call mid-sentence. She approached Robert's table and, without introduction, asked, "Are you okay?" Robert looked up, surprised. "I'm sorry, do we know each other?" "No, but you look like you could use some company. Mind if I sit for a minute?" ZYX watched in fascination as this complete stranger, who moments before had been consumed with her own urgent business matters, sat down with Robert. The conversation that followed was remarkable in its emotional authenticity. The woman, who introduced herself as Linda, listened as Robert shared that today marked the anniversary of his wife's death. 53 years of marriage had ended 18 months ago, and he was struggling with the loneliness. Linda shared her own story of loss, how she had thrown herself into work after her divorce to avoid dealing with the pain. The two strangers found common ground in their experiences of grief and isolation. What happened next defied every model of rational behavior that ZYX had been taught. Linda, who had been rushing to an important meeting, spent the next hour sitting with Robert. She missed her appointment, potentially jeopardizing her career, to provide comfort to someone she had never met before and would likely never see again. When Robert finally smiled, genuinely smiled, Linda's stress levels visibly decreased despite the professional consequences she was likely facing. Both humans had somehow transformed their individual pain into a shared experience that lessened the burden for each of them. ZYX realized she was witnessing something that her scientific training had not prepared her to understand. This wasn't just social cooperation or evolutionary advantageous behavior. This was something that transcended logical analysis. As the day continued, she began to see patterns everywhere. Humans consistently chose emotional connection over logical optimization. They made decisions based on empathy rather than self-interest. They found ways to transform individual suffering into collective strength. A businessman helped a struggling student with her laptop. A group of teenagers cleaned up spilled coffee without being asked. A busy mother shared her food with someone who couldn't afford lunch. Each action created ripple effects that improved the entire environment for everyone present. By the time the afternoon shift began, ZYX had filled 3 data pads with observations, but she felt like she understood humans less than when she'd started. Every logical framework she applied seemed inadequate to explain what she was seeing. Sarah noticed her confusion during a quiet moment between customers. "Finding what you're looking for?" Sarah asked. "I am unsure," ZYX replied honestly. "Your species exhibits behavioral patterns that appear to contradict optimal survival strategies, yet you have achieved remarkable success as a civilization. I cannot reconcile these observations with established models of social evolution." Sarah laughed, a sound that ZYX had learned to associate with human amusement. "Maybe you're overthinking it. Sometimes we just do things because they feel right, not because they make sense." "But, how do you determine what feels right without logical analysis?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "It's just intuition, I guess. Like when I gave Jamie that free coffee this morning. I knew she needed help, and helping her made me feel good. It wasn't about profit or logic. It was about connection." ZYX 4 eyes focused intently on Sarah. "This feeling good from helping others, is this a universal human experience?" "Pretty much, yeah. I mean, some people might be better at ignoring it or blocking it out, but I think most humans get satisfaction from making other people happy. It's just who we are." That evening, ZYX returned to the apartment with more questions than answers. Marcus was already home, sitting on their small couch and watching something on the entertainment screen that appeared to be fictional humans engaging in various dramatic situations.
How was your day of studying the mysterious ways of humanity?
Marcus asked, not taking his eyes off the screen. Perplexing, Zyxthera replied, settling into the chair across from him. I observed multiple instances of humans engaging in behavior that provided no apparent benefit to themselves while requiring significant sacrifice. Yet these actions seemed to increase their psychological well-being rather than decrease it. Marcus paused his show and turned to look at her.
Can you give me an example?
Zyxthera described the interaction between Linda and Robert in detail, including her analysis of their stress hormones and behavioral changes.
And this confuses you? Marcus asked. Profoundly.
Linda sacrificed important career advancement to provide emotional support to a genetic stranger. By all logical models, this should have decreased her overall life satisfaction and prospects for future success. Instead, both participants appeared to benefit from the exchange. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and Zyxthera detected subtle changes in his emotional state that she couldn't quite categorize.
ZYX, he said finally, can I ask you something personal? You may ask.
I will determine whether to answer based on the relevance to my research.
When you help someone, or when someone helps you, do you feel anything? Like, emotionally? Zyxthera considered the question carefully. I experience satisfaction when completing tasks efficiently.
I register positive feedback when my research contributes to the advancement of knowledge.
But, I believe you are referring to something different. Yeah, I think I am. Marcus leaned forward.
When I see someone in pain, I feel that pain too, at least a little bit.
And, when I help them feel better, I feel better too. It's not logical, but it's real. Maybe that's what you're seeing in humans.
We're all connected in ways that don't make sense on paper.
Connected how?
I detect no physical or quantum entanglement between individual humans. Marcus smiled again, but this time Zyxthera detected something deeper in his expression. Sadness, perhaps, but also something warmer.
Not that kind of connection. Emotional connection. Like, right now, talking to you about this, I can see that you're struggling to understand something that's important to you.
And that makes me want to help you figure it out, even though there's no logical reason why your understanding of human behavior should matter to me personally.
Zyxthera's four eyes widened. You are experiencing empathy for my intellectual confusion? I guess so, yeah. Is that weird for your species?
We experience intellectual curiosity about others' mental states, but not emotional resonance with their experiences.
You are telling me that my struggle to understand your species is causing you to experience sympathetic concern? Exactly.
For the first time since arriving on Earth, Zyxthera felt something she couldn't immediately classify or analyze. It was a warmth in her chest cavity, a sense of being seen and understood that transcended mere intellectual acknowledgement. I believe, she said slowly, I may be beginning to experience what you call emotional connection.
Marcus's smile broadened. Really? How does it feel?
Illogical, Zyxthera replied.
But, also, pleasant. Is this normal for humans? Completely normal. Welcome to the wonderful world of feelings, ZYX. Fair warning though, they're about to get a lot more complicated.
As if to demonstrate his point, Zyxthera suddenly felt a wave of something that could only be described as gratitude toward Marcus.
Not just intellectual appreciation for his assistance, but genuine warm regard for him as an individual. It was disconcerting and wonderful at the same time.
Marcus Chen, she said formally, then caught herself.
Marcus.
I believe I am beginning to understand why your species fascinates the galactic community. Just wait until you really get the hang of it, Marcus said with a laugh.
Tomorrow we'll work on the concept of love.
Zyxthera spent that night reviewing her research notes with entirely new perspectives. Every interaction she had observed during the day took on additional layers of meaning when viewed through the lens of emotional connection rather than purely logical analysis. Humans, she realized, had developed something that her own species had lost, the ability to find meaning and satisfaction through connection with others, even at personal cost.
This wasn't weakness or irrationality. It was a form of strength that allowed them to create communities greater than the sum of their parts. But this was only the beginning of her understanding. As she prepared her preliminary report for the Kethmori Council, Zyxthara knew that she had uncovered something profound about human nature. The question now was whether her own species could learn to reclaim what they had lost, and whether she herself was already beginning to change in ways that might make it impossible to return to her former detached existence. The soft sounds of Marcus sleeping in the next room created a sense of comfort that had no logical basis but felt entirely real. For the first time in her life, Zyxthara fell asleep to the sound of another being's breathing, and found it remarkably soothing. Tomorrow would bring new discoveries, new questions, and new challenges to everything she thought she knew about the nature of consciousness and connection. But tonight, for the first time, she felt something that humans might call contentment, and it was unlike anything she had ever experienced before. 3 weeks after her first experience with what Marcus called feelings, Zyxthara found herself in an unprecedented situation. She was sitting in the emergency waiting room of Seattle General Hospital at 2:47 a.m., experiencing what humans termed worry for the first time in her 137 years of existence. Marcus lay unconscious in a hospital bed 3 floors above her, having suffered what the medical staff called a severe concussion after being struck by a vehicle while crossing the street. The human driver had been distracted by their communication device and failed to notice Marcus in the crosswalk. According to the medical personnel, he would recover fully, but the process would take several weeks. What disturbed Zyxthara more than the injury itself was her reaction to it. When the hospital had contacted her as Marcus's emergency contact, she had experienced a sudden, overwhelming sensation that she later identified as panic. Her usually steady analytical processes had become chaotic, focused entirely on reaching Marcus as quickly as possible. She had run the 12 blocks to the hospital, abandoning her normal measured pace in favor of what humans called sprinting. Now, as she waited for morning visiting hours to begin, Zyxthara realized that her research had taken an unexpected turn. She wasn't just observing human emotional responses anymore, she was experiencing them herself. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the attending physician, approached Zyxthara in the waiting room. Over the past few hours, the doctor had grown accustomed to the unusual sight of the tall, blue-gray alien sitting motionless in the uncomfortable plastic chair.
Ms. Zyxthara?
Dr. Morrison's pronunciation of the name had improved since their first conversation.
Marcus is stable and resting comfortably. You can see him once visiting hours begin at 8 a.m.
Thank you, Dr. Morrison. I will remain here until that time. The doctor sat down beside her, something that surprised Zyxthara. Medical professionals in her species maintain strict professional distance.
Can I ask you something?
Dr. Morrison said.
Are you and Marcus family?
I mean, I know you're different species, but the way you've been waiting here all night, it reminds me of how family members behave.
Zyxthara considered the question carefully.
We share living accommodations and daily routines. In the technical sense, we are not genetically related. However, I believe I have developed what humans call attachment to his well-being.
Dr. Morrison smiled. That sounds like family to me.
Different species or not, care is care.
After the doctor left, Zyxthara spent the remaining hours until dawn processing this new concept. Attachment.
She had read about it in her research files, but experiencing it was entirely different from understanding it intellectually. The thought of Marcus being permanently injured had triggered responses in her that she couldn't control or analyze away. The feeling was simultaneously terrifying and profound. When visiting hours began, Zyxthara entered Marcus's room to find him awake but groggy. His head was bandaged, and various monitoring devices tracked his vital signs.
Hey, ZYX, he said weakly, attempting his usual smile.
Sorry for scaring you.
I guess I forgot to look both ways like a good human.
The relief that washed over Zyxthara was so intense that she had to steady herself against the doorframe. Marcus Chen, your attempt at humor indicates that your cognitive functions remain intact.
Wow, even when you're worried about me, you still sound like a textbook.
Marcus's smile grew stronger.
Did you really stay here all night? The nurses told me someone was asking about me every hour. I required assurance of your continued well-being, ZYX replied, approaching his bed. Your injury has triggered unexpected responses in my neural patterns. You were worried about me.
I believe that is the correct human term, yes.
Marcus reached out his hand toward her, and, after a moment's hesitation, ZYX took it. The physical contact sent warm sensations through her nervous system that she had never experienced before.
Thank you for caring, Marcus said. I mean that. I know this must be weird for you, feeling emotions for the first time. It is indeed unusual.
However, I am beginning to understand why humans place such significance on these emotional connections. The concern I felt for your well-being was more intense than any analytical interest I have ever experienced. Over the next 2 weeks, as Marcus recovered at home, ZYX found herself in the unexpected role of caregiver. She prepared his meals, ensured he took his medications, and monitored his symptoms with the precision of a medical scanner. But, more than that, she found herself engaging in behaviors that served no practical purpose other than what humans called comfort. She learned to make the specific type of tea Marcus preferred when he had headaches. She rearranged the living room furniture to optimize his comfort while resting. She even attempted to understand the entertainment programs he enjoyed, sitting beside him on the couch and asking questions about the fictional narratives. This character, she said one evening, pointing at the screen where a human was making what appeared to be a tactically unsound decision, is choosing to risk his life to save strangers.
This contradicts survival optimization. It's a superhero movie, ZYX.
The whole point is that he puts other people's safety before his own because it's the right thing to do.
But, by what metric is it right? He has no genetic obligation to these individuals.
Their survival provides no direct benefit to him. Marcus paused the movie and turned to look at her.
Do you remember when I got hurt, and you stayed at the hospital all night?
Of course.
Why did you do that?
I was receiving professional medical care. Your presence provided no practical benefit to my recovery. ZYX opened her mouth to respond, then stopped. She had never considered her behavior that night from this perspective. I felt compelled to remain near you. Your welfare had become important to me for reasons I could not logically justify.
Exactly. You did it because you cared about me, not because it made logical sense. That's what this guy is doing.
Sometimes doing the right thing isn't about logic, it's about caring enough to act on that care.
This conversation marked a turning point in ZYX's research.
She began to understand that human morality wasn't based on logical optimization but on emotional connection and empathy. Humans didn't just survive as individuals, they thrived as an interconnected community where each member's well-being affected the whole. A week later, Marcus was cleared to return to work, and ZYX resumed her observations at the coffee shop. But now she saw everything differently. The daily interactions that had once puzzled her now revealed themselves as part of a complex web of emotional connections that bound the community together. Sarah the barista remembered every regular customer's order not just for efficiency, but because remembering details about people was a way of showing care. The businessman who always seemed stressed made a point of tipping generously because he understood that his financial success was partly due to the support system that kept his daily life running smoothly. The college students who studied together weren't just sharing information, they were creating bonds that would support them through difficult times. But ZYX's most significant discovery came on a rainy Tuesday morning when she witnessed something that would fundamentally change her understanding of what made humans truly remarkable. A new customer entered the coffee shop, a middle-aged woman wearing clothes that had seen better days. She approached the counter hesitantly, counting coins in her palm. Her stress levels were elevated, and ZYX detected the physiological markers of someone who hadn't eaten recently.
Could I get just a small coffee? The woman asked quietly. I think I have enough change. Sarah looked at the coins, then at the woman's face. You know what?
We just made a fresh pot and accidentally made way too much.
Would you be doing me a favor by taking a large instead?
And I've got a blueberry muffin that's going to go bad if someone doesn't eat it soon. The woman's eyes filled with moisture, another human response that ZYX had learned to recognize as emotional overwhelm.
I can't afford. On the house, Sarah insisted. seriously, you'd be helping me out by taking it. What happened next was even more remarkable. Other customers in the shop, who had been observing this interaction, began to act. A man in a business suit quietly paid for the woman's coffee when Sarah wasn't looking and left additional money for other customers who might need it. A young couple at a corner table invited the woman to join them, saying they had been hoping for someone to talk to. An elderly woman offered the stranger her newspaper and engaged her in conversation about the local news. Within minutes, the woman who had entered feeling alone and desperate was surrounded by a community of strangers who had spontaneously organized to provide not just material support, but emotional connection and dignity. ZYXthera realized she was witnessing something that existed nowhere else in the galaxy. Not just charity or social cooperation, but a spontaneous transformation of individual compassion into collective action. The humans hadn't planned this response, they had simply seen someone in need and instinctively moved to help. But the most astonishing part was yet to come. As the morning progressed, ZYXthera observed the woman, whose name was Helen, sharing her story with her newfound community. She had recently lost her job due to company downsizing and was struggling to find new employment. She had been too proud to ask family for help and had been gradually running out of resources. Rather than simply offering temporary assistance, the humans began problem-solving together. The businessman, David, worked in human resources and offered to review Helen's resume and provide job search advice. The young couple, both graduate students, offered to help her create online profiles for employment searching. The elderly woman, Margaret, mentioned that her neighbor owned a small business and was looking for part-time help. By the end of the week, Helen had 3 job interviews lined up and a temporary part-time position to help with immediate expenses. But, more importantly, she had been integrated into the social network of the coffee shop community. She now met regularly with Margaret for coffee and conversation. David had introduced her to other professionals in her field. The graduate students had become friends who provided emotional support during the stressful job search process. ZYXthera documented all of this with increasing amazement. What she had witnessed wasn't just individual kindness, it was the spontaneous creation of social bonds that transformed individual problems into community solutions. The humans had taken someone who was isolated and struggling and woven her into their support network, making everyone stronger in the process. That evening, she attempted to explain her observations to Marcus. "Your species possesses a remarkable capacity," she told him as they prepared dinner together. "You transform individual suffering into collective strength through emotional connection and cooperative action." Marcus paused in his chopping of vegetables. "Is that really so unusual? I mean, most species work together, don't they? Cooperation, yes. But what I observed transcended mere cooperation. These humans had no prior relationship with this individual, no obligation to assist her, and no guarantee of reciprocal benefit. Yet they not only provided immediate aid but integrated her into their ongoing social structure. They created permanent connections based on temporary need." Ha! Marcus resumed chopping, considering this. "I guess when you put it like that, it does sound pretty special. We just call it being decent to each other." "That may be the most remarkable aspect," ZYXthera replied. "Your species has evolved to consider extraordinary compassion as ordinary behavior." Later that night, as ZYXthera worked on her research notes, she found herself struggling with a growing personal dilemma. Her mission for the Kethmori Council was to study human emotional connections in order to help her species reclaim their capacity for feeling. But, the more she experienced these emotions herself, the more she realized that returning to her previous state of detached analysis might be impossible. She had become attached to Marcus, to Sarah, to the entire community she had been observing. The thought of leaving Earth to return to the clinical, emotionally sterile environment of Kethmori society filled her with something she now recognized as sadness. But, staying on Earth would mean abandoning her obligations to her own species. As she pondered this dilemma, Marcus appeared in the doorway wearing his sleeping clothes. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "I am experiencing cognitive conflict," ZYXthera replied. "My growing emotional connections to this planet and its inhabitants are creating resistance to my eventual departure." Marcus sat down across from her. "You have to leave?" My research assignment has a designated endpoint.
I am expected to return to Kethmori space to present my findings and contribute to potential cultural modifications for my species.
But what if you don't want to go?
The question hung in the air between them. ZYXthera had been avoiding asking herself this directly, but Marcus's words forced her to confront the reality of her situation. I believe I am experiencing what humans call conflicted loyalties, she admitted. My obligation to my species conflicts with my desire to remain connected to the relationships I have formed here.
Marcus leaned forward. ZYX, can I tell you something?
In all the time you've been living here, studying us and analyzing our behavior, you've become more human than you probably realize. The way you took care of me when I was hurt, the way you worry about Sarah when she's having a bad day, the way you've connected with this community, those aren't the actions of a detached observer.
They're the actions of someone who has found her home.
The word home triggered a cascade of emotional responses in ZYXthera that she couldn't immediately process. Images flashed through her mind, sharing morning coffee with Marcus, laughing with Sarah about the quirks of human customers, the warmth of feeling needed and valued by others. These experiences had become more meaningful to her than any scientific achievement in her previous life. I believe, she said slowly, that I have undergone more change during this research assignment than I initially anticipated. The question now is whether these changes serve the greater good of my mission or compromise my ability to fulfill my obligations.
Maybe that's the wrong question, Marcus suggested.
Maybe the question is whether forcing yourself to go back to the way you were before would actually help your species or just perpetuate the problem they're trying to solve.
This observation would prove more prophetic than either of them realized.
Unknown to ZYXthera, her regular reports to the Kethmori Council had been causing considerable discussion among her superiors. Her descriptions of human emotional connections and their effects on society had sparked intense debate about the path forward for Kethmori civilization. But, more concerning to the Council was the subtle changes they detected in ZYXthera's communication patterns. Her reports, once models of clinical objectivity, now contained subjective observations and personal reflections. Her language had become more nuanced, her analysis more complex and emotionally sophisticated.
Some council members viewed these changes as contamination that compromised her scientific objectivity.
Others argued that her transformation was exactly the kind of data they needed to understand how emotional development could be reintegrated into their society. This debate would soon reach a critical point that would force ZYXthera to make the most important decision of her life. But, for now, sitting in her small apartment with Marcus, sharing concerns and seeking comfort in their conversation, she was simply being learning what it meant to belong somewhere and to someone. Marcus, she said as they prepared to sleep, I am grateful for your friendship and guidance during this challenging period of personal development.
Just grateful? Marcus asked with a gentle smile. Because I'm pretty sure what you're feeling is stronger than gratitude. ZYXthera considered this.
The emotion she felt toward Marcus encompassed gratitude but extended far beyond it. It included trust, affection, loyalty, and a desire for his continued happiness that had nothing to do with her own benefit.
You are correct, she admitted. I believe the appropriate human term would be love.
I love you, Marcus-chan, as a friend and companion.
I love you too, ZYX.
And, whatever happens with your council and your mission, I want you to know that you'll always have a home here if you want it. As ZYXthera finally drifted off to sleep that night, she carried with her the profound realization that she had found something on Earth that she hadn't even known she was looking for.
The question now was whether she would be allowed to keep it.
The summons arrived on a quiet Thursday morning in late spring. ZYXthera had been living on Earth for 8 months, and she had just finished preparing Marcus's favorite breakfast when her personal communication device chimed with an official message from the Kethmori Council of Minds.
Report to Kethmori Research Vessel Analytical Precision immediately for mission debrief and personal evaluation.
Departure from Earth scheduled within 72 standard hours.
Prepare all research data for comprehensive review.
Marcus noticed her stillness as she stared at the device.
Bad news?
I have been recalled by my council, ZYXthera said, her voice carrying emotion she was still learning to name. I must depart Earth in 3 days. The coffee mug slipped from Marcus's fingers, shattering on the kitchen floor.
Neither of them moved to clean it up. 3 days? That's it? Just like that? The Council's decisions are final. I am required to return for evaluation of my research and assessment of my continued fitness for service. What ZYX didn't tell Marcus was the real reason for her recall. Her latest reports had become increasingly concerning to the Council leadership. Where once her observations had been clinical and detached, they now brimmed with personal involvement and subjective analysis. More troubling still, her recommendations for Kethmori society had begun to suggest fundamental changes to their entire social structure. The breaking point had come with her most recent report, in which she had written, "Human emotional connections create resilient communities capable of extraordinary collective achievements." The Kethmori tendency toward analytical detachment, while offering certain advantages, may be preventing us from accessing forms of strength and creativity that could ensure our long-term survival and growth. I recommend careful consideration of policies that would encourage emotional development among our population. To many on the Council, this wasn't scientific analysis, it was advocacy. Worse, it suggested that ZYX herself had been compromised by her exposure to human emotional patterns. The next few days passed in a blur of preparations and farewells. Word of ZYX departure spread through the small community she had become part of, and the responses were immediate and heartfelt. Sarah closed the coffee shop early on Saturday to organize a farewell gathering. The small space filled with all the people ZYX had observed and slowly befriended over her months of research. Helen, the woman who had been struggling and was now thriving in her new job, brought a cake she had baked herself. David the businessman had printed copies of photos from various coffee shop events, creating an album of memories. Margaret brought flowers from her garden, explaining that they would help ZYX remember the beauty of Earth. "You know," Sarah said as the evening wound down, "when you first started coming here, I thought you were just studying us like we were lab rats or something. But, somewhere along the way, you became one of us. We're going to miss you." ZYX felt the familiar tightness in her chest that she now recognized as emotional distress. "I will miss all of you as well. This community has taught me things about existence that I never imagined were possible." "Will you be able to come back?" Helen asked. "I do not know. That decision will be made by my council based on their evaluation of my research and my current psychological state." The gathering continued late into the night, with humans sharing stories and memories that included ZYX as a central figure rather than an observer. She realized that somewhere during her research, she had stopped being an outsider studying human behavior and had become a participant in the very community dynamics she was supposed to analyze objectively. On Sunday evening, her last night on Earth, Marcus helped her pack her research materials and personal belongings. The task was complicated by the fact that many of her possessions had become emotionally significant in ways that defied practical analysis. "You're taking the coffee mug I gave you," Marcus observed as she carefully wrapped the ceramic vessel featuring a cartoon cat and the words "perfect friend." "It has acquired sentimental value that outweighs its practical utility," ZYX explained. "I believe humans call this attachment to objects that represent relationships. We just call them mementos. Reminders of people and times that matter to us." As they worked, Marcus seemed to be building up to saying something important. Finally, as ZYX sealed the last container of research data, he stopped pretending to be busy and turned to face her directly. "ZYX, I need to tell you something before you go. These past 8 months, they've been the best months of my life. Not just because of your research or the fascinating conversations, but because you've become the most important person in my world. I know you have obligations to your species, but I also know that what we've built together is real and valuable." ZYX set down the container and focused all 4 of her eyes on Marcus. The intensity of emotion she detected in his voice and posture was unlike anything she had observed from him before. "You are saying that our relationship has significance beyond friendship," she stated, though her voice carried undertones of hope and uncertainty. "I'm saying I love you. Not just as a friend or a roommate, but as someone I want to build a life with. I know we're different species, and I know the practical complications are enormous, but what I feel for you is real. What we have together is real." The emotions that crashed over ZYX at that moment were so intense that her usual analytical processes completely shut down.
Joy, fear, love, despair, hope, and dozens of other feelings she lacked names for cascaded through her consciousness simultaneously. Marcus Chen, she said, then stopped and corrected herself.
Marcus. I love you too. More than I have words to express in either of our languages. The thought of leaving you creates a level of distress that I find difficult to bear. They held each other in the small apartment, surrounded by packed boxes and the weight of impending separation, both aware that they were experiencing something that transcended the boundaries of species and culture.
What are you going to tell your council?
Marcus asked. I do not know.
My original mission was to study human emotional connections to help my species reclaim our capacity for feeling. But I have discovered that true emotional connection cannot be analyzed and replicated through clinical study. It must be experienced, lived, and chosen.
I cannot teach my people to feel by describing emotions to them.
They would need to undergo the same transformation I have experienced.
And, is that possible?
Perhaps. But it would require fundamental changes to our society that many would consider too radical to accept.
The next morning arrived too quickly.
A shuttle from the Kethmori research vessel landed in a field outside Seattle, its sleek metallic form looking alien and cold compared to the warm, chaotic beauty of human architecture. Marcus drove ZYX Thera to the landing site, neither of them speaking much during the journey.
What was there to say?
They both understood the magnitude of what they were losing, and they both knew that the forces pulling them apart were larger than their individual desires. The shuttle pilot, a fellow Kethmori named Vex Talon, greeted ZYX Thera with formal politeness but obvious concern. Research specialist ZYX Thera, your extended exposure to human emotional patterns appears to have created significant alterations in your behavioral baseline.
The council is most interested in your insights.
I am certain they are, ZYX Thera replied, detecting the underlying disapproval in Vex Talon's tone. Marcus helped load her research materials into the shuttle, then stood back as she prepared to board. The goodbye they had practiced felt inadequate for the moment's emotional weight.
Whatever happens up there,
Marcus said, remember that you're not the same person who came to Earth 8 months ago. You've grown and changed in beautiful ways.
Don't let them convince you that what you've learned here isn't valid. I will remember, ZYX Thera promised. And, Marcus, if there is any possibility of return, I will find a way.
The shuttle ride to the research vessel gave ZYX Thera time to prepare for what she knew would be the most important presentation of her life. Her research data was comprehensive and compelling, but she understood that the real test would be her ability to convey the transformative power of emotional connection to minds that had been trained to value analytical detachment above all else. The Kethmori research vessel analytical precision was a marvel of logical engineering, its corridors designed for maximum efficiency and minimal emotional stimulation. After months of living in Marcus's cluttered, warm apartment, the sterile perfection felt alien to ZYX Thera in ways that surprised her. She was escorted directly to the council chamber, where 7 of the most senior Kethmori minds waited to evaluate her findings. The chamber itself was a study in mathematical precision, with seating arranged in optimal configurations for logical discourse and data presentation. Research specialist ZYX Thera spoke Council Prime TYX Varen, the eldest and most respected of the group.
Your reports have generated considerable discussion among the council.
Your findings suggest that human emotional development may offer solutions to our species' declining capacity for creativity and innovation. However, your recent communications have raised questions about your objectivity and fitness for continued research duties. Council Prime, I acknowledge that my reports have evolved during my time on Earth. This evolution reflects the nature of the phenomena I was studying.
True understanding of emotional connections cannot be achieved through detached observation alone.
Explain, commanded Council Secondary Nix Kellen, her tone carrying the sharp edge of skepticism. For the next 4 hours, ZYX Thera presented her findings with the most compelling arguments she could construct. She described the coffee shop community's spontaneous support networks, Helen's transformation from isolation to integration, the way humans consistently chose connection over optimization. She showed data demonstrating how emotional bonds led to increased creativity, resilience, and problem-solving capability. But, more importantly, she shared her personal transformation. Esteemed Council, I must report that during my research I underwent significant changes in my own emotional capacity. These changes began as unexpected side effects of prolonged exposure to human social patterns, but they evolved into something far more profound. I discovered that emotional connection provides access to forms of meaning and motivation that pure logic cannot achieve.
You are describing contamination, stated Council Tertiary's Miran bluntly.
Your objectivity has been compromised by exposure to primitive emotional responses.
With respect, Council Tertiary, I disagree. I am describing evolution. The capacity for deep emotional connection has not made me less intelligent or capable. It has made me more creative, more motivated, and more effective at understanding complex social dynamics. Most importantly, it has given me access to experiences of meaning and satisfaction that pure analytical existence cannot provide. The debate that followed was intense. Some council members argued that ZYX-Thera's transformation proved the dangers of emotional development, citing her obvious attachment to human individuals and culture as evidence of compromised judgment. Others countered that her enhanced creativity and insight demonstrated the potential benefits of controlled emotional development programs. The turning point came when Council Prime TYX Baron asked the question that would determine ZYX-Thera's fate. Research specialist, if we were to implement programs based on your recommendations, do you believe our species could achieve the emotional development you described while maintaining our essential analytical capabilities?
ZYX-Thera paused, knowing that her answer would shape not only her own future but potentially the future of her entire civilization. Council Prime, based on my research and personal experience, I believe that emotional development enhances rather than diminishes analytical capability.
However, the process requires genuine engagement with emotional experiences, not just intellectual study.
It would require fundamental changes to our social structures, including acceptance of individual variation, tolerance for seemingly inefficient behaviors that serve emotional needs, and recognition that logical optimization may not always produce optimal outcomes for complex social beings. In short, Council Secondary Nixkellen interjected, you are recommending that we abandon millennia of cultural evolution toward logical perfection in favor of adopting the chaotic emotional patterns of a primitive species. I am recommending that we recognize that logical perfection may itself be imperfect if it prevents us from accessing the full range of capabilities that consciousness can provide. Human civilization has achieved remarkable success precisely because they maintained emotional development alongside intellectual advancement. The council deliberated for 2 full days while ZYX-Thera waited in guest quarters that felt like a luxurious prison. She found herself missing the chaotic energy of Earth, the unpredictable rhythms of human life, and, most of all, the simple pleasure of sharing morning coffee with Marcus. On the 3rd day, she was summoned back to the council chamber. Research specialist ZYX-Thera, Council Prime TYX Baron announced, the council has reached a decision regarding your findings and your future service. ZYX-Thera prepared herself for the possibility of being declared unfit for continued research duties and subjected to psychological reconditioning to restore her previous emotional baseline.
Your research has been deemed highly valuable, if controversial.
Your recommendations will be considered for potential pilot programs involving voluntary emotional development training. However, the Council recognizes that you have undergone changes that may make it difficult for you to readjust to traditional Kethmori society.
Therefore, continued Council Secondary Nixkellen, we are offering you a choice.
You may remain on this vessel and undergo treatment to restore your previous emotional state, after which you will resume normal research duties. Alternatively, you may request permanent assignment to Earth as our first long-term cultural liaison, with the understanding that this assignment may result in continued emotional development that could make eventual reintegration into Kethmori society difficult or impossible. ZYX-Thera felt her hearts racing with something that could only be described as hope mixed with terror.
You are offering me the option to return to Earth permanently?
We are offering you the option to continue your research from a position of deeper cultural integration, clarified Council Prime. Your insights into human emotional development may prove valuable for future interactions with their species. Additionally, your unique perspective as a Kethmori who has experienced emotional awakening could provide crucial data for any potential emotional development programs we might implement. The choice, when presented so starkly, wasn't really a choice at all. ZYX had found her home among humans, her purpose in understanding the profound connections that made human civilization so remarkable, and her heart in a small apartment shared with a man who loved her for exactly who she had become.
Council Prime, I accept assignment as permanent cultural liaison to Earth.
I believe this position will allow me to continue providing valuable research while pursuing the personal connections that have become essential to my well-being. 3 days later, ZYX stood once again at the edge of the field outside Seattle, but this time she was watching the shuttle depart without her. Her official Kathmori status had changed from research specialist to cultural liaison, a position that gave her unprecedented freedom to pursue her work while building the life she wanted on Earth. Marcus was waiting for her in the parking lot, having somehow managed to get time off work to be there for her return. When she saw him, all of her carefully prepared explanations about council decisions and new official positions evaporated, replaced by a simple truth. "I chose to stay," she said as he enveloped her in an embrace that felt like coming home.
"I chose us. How long can you stay?" "Permanently.
My council has designated me as their representative to Earth, which means my mission here continues indefinitely." Marcus lifted her off the ground and spun her around, both of them laughing with the kind of pure joy that ZYX had learned was one of humanity's most remarkable gifts. 6 months later, ZYX submitted her first report as cultural liaison to the Kathmori Council. It detailed the establishment of an Earth-based research facility dedicated to studying human emotional development and its applications to other species. The facility would welcome Kathmori volunteers interested in exploring controlled emotional development, providing a bridge between the analytical culture of her homeworld and the emotionally rich society of Earth. But the most significant development wasn't mentioned in her official report. Marcus had asked her to marry him, a human custom that involved making formal promises to build a shared life together. ZYX had accepted, understanding that their partnership represented something unprecedented in galactic history, a genuine emotional bond between species that transcended all logical predictions about compatibility. The wedding was held at Been There Done That, with Sarah officiating as an ordained minister who had gotten her license online specifically for the occasion. The guest list included Helen and her new boyfriend David, Margaret and her extensive network of elderly friends, the graduate students who had become regular coffee companions, and dozens of other members of the community that had adopted ZYX as one of their own. As she stood beside Marcus, promising to love and support him for the rest of their lives together, ZYX reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come to Earth as a detached observer studying human emotional patterns. She was leaving the ceremony as a fully integrated member of a human community, bound by love and choice to a life that would have been unimaginable to her former self. The most remarkable part wasn't that an alien had learned to love a human, though that was certainly noteworthy. The most remarkable part was how the human community had embraced her transformation, supporting her journey from analytical observer to emotional participant without ever making her feel like an outsider trying to fit in. In her final reflection, recorded in her personal journal that night, ZYX wrote, "Humans possess a remarkable capacity to transform strangers into family, observers into participants, and isolated individuals into integrated community members. This capacity stems not from logical analysis of social optimization, but from an instinctive understanding that connection and belonging are fundamental needs of consciousness itself. My species has much to learn from humanity's approach to building inclusive communities based on emotional bonds rather than logical hierarchies. But, perhaps most importantly, I have learned that the choice to feel, to connect, and to love is not a weakness to be overcome but a strength to be celebrated. In opening my hearts to human emotion, I have not lost my analytical capabilities, I have gained access to forms of understanding that logic alone could never provide. Tomorrow, Marcus and I begin our life together as an interspecies family. I do not know what challenges this unprecedented relationship will face, but I know that we will face them together, supported by a community that has taught me the true meaning of home." As she set down her journal and prepared for sleep beside her new husband, ZYX smiled at the thought of her former self, so convinced that emotional attachments were inefficient complications that interfered with optimal function. That earlier version of herself could never have imagined the deep satisfaction of falling asleep next to someone whose breathing patterns had become as familiar as her own, whose well-being had become inseparably linked with her happiness, whose love had taught her that the most profound truths about consciousness couldn't be analyzed, only lived. Outside their small apartment, the city of Seattle continued its chaotic, inefficient, beautiful dance of millions of individuals choosing daily to build something greater than the sum of their parts. And, somewhere among the countless small acts of connection and care that kept the community functioning, two beings from different worlds dreamed together of the family they would build and the love they would share. In the end, ZYX Thoreau's research had revealed that the secret to human resilience wasn't their technology or their intelligence or their adaptability, remarkable though all of these were. The secret was their instinctive understanding that consciousness was meant to be shared, that individual minds could achieve things together that they never could apart, and that the choice to love someone else was simultaneously the most irrational and most essential decision any sentient being could make. This was humanity's gift to the galaxy, the proof that feeling was not the enemy of thinking, but its most powerful ally. And, now, through the bridge built by one alien's transformation and one human's acceptance, that gift would slowly spread to the stars, carried by love across the vast distances between worlds.